All right, guys, let's get this party started. So welcome to How to Recruit Your Board to Your Fundraising Team, Creating and Cultivating Fundraising Expectations. We're going to do some quick introductions of who you've got on the phone from Progressive Multiplier. For those of you who have been with us for Fundraising Fridays since, how long have we been at this? Since October. Halloween was when we started. We're going to do our typical couple of slide review of Progressive Multiplier and how we can be a source of either information and or grants for you. And then I've split this deck into 3 parts, dealing with your board of directors. So recruiting them with a fundraising expectation, onboarding them with a fundraising expectation, and how you activate and store them to keep that fundraising expectation alive and healthy. I have places where I have put placeholders in for discussion after each session. And some of you were kind enough to say you were willing to participate in the discussion. So when you were surveyed by the Resilience Initiative or Haas Jr. So I will, if things get quiet, I might call on those folks who were kind enough to volunteer. With that, my name is Bethany Mackey. I'm the managing director here at Progressive Multiplier. My background is in nonprofit fundraising and marketing. I spent 10 years as a fundraiser within nonprofits. Started as an AIDS Walk coordinator and ran memory walks at the chapter level for Alzheimer's Association. Worked at the national level for American Diabetes Association as both a online fundraiser and then broader sort of digital constituent relationship stuff. And then made the migration over to the agency side and worked over at 2 different agencies over the last 10 years, servicing clients in the healthcare sector and veteran service organizations, some environmental clients and some faith-based clients. So I've been privileged to work with some really amazing groups over the last 20 years. I came to Progressive Multiplier about 18 months ago as the program director. So for any of you who are grantees, I'm your contact or prospective grantees. So I work as kind of in-house fundraising consultant for our grantees as they work through revenue generation projects with us. And with me on the phone is the lovely, talented, and amazing Jasmine Kearse. Jazz, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, Jasmine Kearse, the Associate Director of Marketing and Constituent Engagement. I've been with Progressive Multiplier now for about almost a year. And I came from Boys and Girls Clubs of America, where I was a part of the mass market fundraising and engagement team. And before that, a part of their alumni program, the team that spearheaded the alumni program. And then I also came from Salvation Army, where I did some of their social services efforts. So I'm happy to be here and welcome everybody.
All right. And for everybody on the phone, we are thrilled to partner with the Resilience Initiative, which was an initiative set up through funding from the Packard Foundation to help groups through the pandemic, offering different sort of help desk services. We cover the fundraising desk, so to speak. So we have 2 offerings for our Resilience Initiative folks, both these fundraising Fridays as well as one-on-one consultations up to 5 hours. And we also have, over the last few weeks, had grantees from the Flexible Leadership Award grantees through the Haas Jr. Fund. And again, we are also inviting you guys to Fundraising Fridays and one-on-one consultations as well. I'm going to do a plug both now and at the end of the presentations. One of the things we've done through our one-on-one consultations is actual board fundraising training. So like I do a virtual presentation for boards to help you with the training the board. So just keep that in mind as we go through that. I'd ask that everybody introduce themselves in the chat with your name, your organization, and the role you play. We usually have folks who are development directors, we have executive directors, we have fundraising managers, and everything in between. So we like to know who has joined us and who's interested in our content. We will be recording this session and sharing it with Resilience Initiative grantees as well as FLA grantees. And they will be password protected. So these presentations aren't public, but your fellow grantees will be able to access them. If you have any concerns about that, please feel free to reach out to Jasmine or I. Any questions before we get started? All right, Jazz, as always, I'm going to ask you to holler at me if there's anything sitting in the chat.
Will do.
So a quick introduction, thank you, ma'am, to Progressive Multiplier. As I mentioned, we are a funding intermediary. And the basic problem we solve for, or are trying very hard to solve for, is that we know that philanthropy, for as much as they invest, it is not enough money for the progressive movement to reach scale. Because if all the money they give was enough, the progressive movement would have made much more progress to date. So what we're trying to do with our offering is find repeatable, scalable revenue generation projects and methods that have a potential to return $2 for every dollar granted. We fund those methods with several different types of grants and market rate loans. And we work with our grantees through their fundraising projects, driving supporters and dollars to their nonprofits. Then we get the project and experiment results. We publish them in our Center of Excellence. And so all of the progressive movement can pick up those learnings and move the starting line forward for themselves. So that's what we do in a nutshell. We work with 3 different portfolios of organizations: achieving justice, realizing democracy, and restoring the environment. We fund what I call civic engagement organizations primarily. For now, we are still a little bit in startup mode. We're on year 2 of our trajectory. So we do not fund organizations who strictly do direct service only. But if you question whether or not you would be eligible for funding with us, please shoot me an email, give me a call. We can talk about your business case. We have lots of organizations that do direct service, but also have civic engagement and advocacy work that they do. So we just really try to find organizations that have that balance. We hope to expand our services and our funding to all organizations as we grow up. So if you have any questions about if you're eligible, please let us know. Regardless of whether or not you are grant eligible with the Progressive Multiplier, we provide a free online community for the progressive sector called the Center of Excellence. You can find it on our website at progressivemultiplier.fund. Jasmine is our community moderator and guru. So she is your point for any questions on how to get in or feedback on what you'd like to see in there. Right now, you can access a lot of how-to articles that we've aggregated from some great sources, ones that we've written ourselves, case studies of all of our grantee projects that are finished to see what they learned, and you can pick up their budget templates and reports that they did along the way. So definitely sign up and poke around in there. We do have 2 funding opportunities coming up. If you are an environmental justice organization and interested in revenue generation, please reach out to me. We are doing an invite-only call for some funding we're expecting in March. And then we will have our Progressive Stimulus Project second tranche of funding, hopefully in the next few months. We're just waiting for funder commitment to come through on those. Any questions about the Progressive Multiplier before I dig into all things board and fundraising? All right, I shall soldier on here. Okay, so here's what we hear from all of our grantees and a lot of the grantees we've worked with through Resilience Initiative. The board members aren't down with fundraising. They aren't involved. They don't donate. They don't want to talk about it because they don't want to rock the boat, and they aren't big on change. And they're not really clear that fundraising is an implicit part of what they're supposed to do. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we hear frequently from our grantees. And certainly what I've experienced in my career in nonprofit. So would love to hear from you guys about what your biggest fundraising challenges are with your board so that we can kind of tailor our conversation along the way. So who's got board fundraising challenges? Isabella, do you want to tell us what your challenge is?
Yeah, they don't fundraise at all. And if they do, it's like not within the give and get commitment that they're supposed to fulfill. And we have a total of 8 board members, and maybe I would say like 25% of them donate.
That sounds pretty typical. Anybody else have that on the call?
Hi, this is Janelle from Advancing Justice LA.
Hey, Janelle.
Good seeing you again. Thank you, Bethany. We have a great board. About a third meet their give-get requirement. a third get at least halfway there, and a third have a far stretch to go. I will say that we were trying to get, over the past few years, 100% personal involvement, at least a personal give. And there were still a couple trickling who, I don't know if it was oversight or one specifically said, nope, thanks. My personal, and professional contributions will be what I give. So I think that 100% personal give is something that we'd like to reach to.
Does anybody have 100% board giving on the call? Has anybody been able to get to that holy grail? Michelle, have you?
Sorry. Yeah, we have 100% giving. It's kind of what we stipulate when we onboard board members, is that everybody's expected to give a gift, and it depends on what's meaningful to you. And we have a huge range in those gifts.
Great,
Gotcha.
Michelle.
Yeah, that's I was gonna say, do you want to teach this class? Because I've never gotten 100% board giving. So it sounds like you guys are sort of a little, you've got some great boards, you've got some okay boards, you've got some folks that need some fundraising love on the board side. So I will sort of aim for the middle as I go through this. A lot of you have talked about give get, so we'll get into what that is. Are there any total newbies on the phone that have never touched board fundraising, or that this is like you are just starting out and trying to figure this out? No newbies? All right. If you are, feel free to message us because we can point more in-depth resources your way. All right. So I'm not going to talk about like all things board governance. That is a totally separate several sessions. So we're really looking at this from a recruiting for fundraising, onboarding for fundraising, and then activating around fundraising. So if there are other board type topics and governance-y kind of things that you're interested in, let us know in the survey. We're always happy to do other sessions. We have booked these through June. So I have a lot of content to develop. So if there's any other area of interest, definitely holler. So let's talk about recruitment. You recruit your board to reflect the different perspectives, skill sets, and leadership qualities you need. So I think that there are two skills that there is one that is universal, and then there's one that does not have to be universal. So all of your board members need to be able to understand your organization's financial health. So when I've recruited board members in the past and they go, oh, I'm not a numbers person, or, oh, my spouse balances our checkbook, or I've heard it all. That is a flag that they are not board member material. Doesn't mean they can't be a high-level volunteer or things like that, but your board really has to be able to look at both a cash flow sheet and an accrual balance sheet and really get the financial health of the organization. Because if they don't get the financial health, they don't get the piece that fundraising plays. So I think that the appreciation for financial health as a required skill set for all board members is critical. I see this missed a lot when people recruit more from the programmatic side of the house. I used to work for Allies for Health and Wellness, which is an HIV/AIDS organization in Pittsburgh. Amazing board, but they were all recruited from the programmatic side. So we had amazing HIV/AIDS advocates and caregivers and physicians, but maybe only 20% of them could read a balance sheet accurately and kind of connect those dots. So it made fundraising really, really hard in certain aspects. So that's one thing, you make sure people get the financial health. Fundraising or business development needs to be a required skill that you recruit for some of your board. Depending on the size of your board, I would love, I usually say like 25% of the board needs to be solid fundraisers. We personally at Progressive Multiplier have a 3-person board. So if I get one, I'm set. And I say fundraising or business development because you are more likely to find a business development skill, somebody who understands landing a sale, talking to somebody about a value proposition more easily than you're going to find a professional fundraiser to serve on your board. There are far fewer of us than there are people that do business development for companies. So equate those skills in your head because one is very transferable to the other. Does that make sense? Or any questions there? Nothing in the chat, Miss Jasmine?
All good.
All right. The other thing about recruitment is you have to recruit a board that reflects the community the organization serves. One of the biggest mistakes I see leadership make is they don't consider their staff part of the community that the organization serves. And you have to consider your staff one of your key constituencies because they are your frontline mission delivery folks. So staff has to be considered in what they need in board representation. So that's where you start, make sure that you've done that map in recruiting for whatever particular fundraising skill your staff needs reflected on the board, or understanding of the business that your staff needs reflected on the board as the staff in charge of fundraising. This never gets missed more on the program side where it's like, well, of course we want to have researchers or doctors on a healthcare organization board. And they have counterparts that they work with programmatically. You have to have that same matchup on the fundraising side. So that's really when you start looking and putting together your list of names and the basic job descriptions. These are some of the things you want to keep in mind. All right, job descriptions. You can't be vague. This is, I would say, the number one thing that sets you up for failure with getting your board to fundraise. And this is beyond like a give-get commitment. I see a lot of boards that they just talk about the dollar amounts. Your give-get contract should be several pages long with your board members. Their job description of, on the give piece, be specific about a level or a range of gifts, or I've seen it stated, we expect to be in the top 3 of your philanthropic priorities if you don't want to get into exact numbers, but that you are required to make a gift language. I've seen some boards like we expect a $10,000 plus gift, depending on sort of the type of board and organization, but you can't be delicate about that give expectation. You don't have to have a give expectation because some people also put in the job description, we expect you to mobilize X dollars. They don't have to be your dollars, but you have to get them for us. So that's where you can either have an explicit give or you can do like a give-get hybrid for how many dollars you expect one of your board members to mobilize. When it talks about the get support, this is where I really see the vagary, I will call it, of when I see job descriptions for board people. There's this, we hope you'll support our fundraising activities kind of language. Be super specific. You want them to captain a walk team. You want them to buy a gala table. You want them to host a house party. You want them to do stewardship calls. You want them to solicit XYZ major donor because they are a contact. Like the more specific you can get, the better. And these are obviously going to be custom per board member. And it needs to be really tailored to their skill, their capacity, their comfort. I've had a board before where I've had very, 55 plus year old, very senior professionals with huge networks and a lot of their own net worth serving on the same board with, a 22-year-old, obviously, still just out of school building their professional track. Can't give those folks the same expectation. So really you have to be able to have that candid conversation about their skill, capacity, and comfort. They do not have the option of saying to you, I can't support fundraising. That is, you can't give them that out. And that has to be a sort of in their give-get agreement. It's not just a dollar amount, it is actual activity. Any questions there? Because I very rarely see the fundraising support get activities laid out properly in a give-get contract. Does anybody have any issues there they want to talk about? Nothing in the chat, Jess.
Can I say something?
Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah. This was actually what I was gonna say as one of the challenges that we have with my board, and it's like we want them to support, but it's not specific enough. And you totally gave me the key that I needed, which was it has to be personalized for every board member because it's not the same for everyone. They don't have the same networks or whatever it is. It's different for everyone, and so this is like so super helpful.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. The way I've done this before when I've had to recruit is during the recruiting process, doing kind of that initial almost discovery that you would almost with a major donor of, their interests, their capacity, where their passion points lie, what kind of time do they have, and just sort of get a feel. And then when I have the follow-up meeting for onboarding, I come with a draft of the give get based on what I know, and then actually edit it in real time with the person based on what they're comfortable with. But at least that discovery conversation gives me a starting point for that customization. The other thing to keep, go ahead, Jess.
Okay. Well, someone asked for a good example that we could possibly share after the call. And then someone asked, and you may address this later in the presentation, but someone asked, what do you do with inactive board members?
Inactive in terms of they are currently serving, but being kind of a dud, or inactive in that they are alumni board members?
Serving and dud.
Those are two different answers.
Serving
and dud. Okay.
I love it.
Yeah, that's the thing with Fundraising Fridays. It's, what happens stays in the call. We get to be candid here. So you've got two options. There's sort of a remediation track of having the candid conversation that is really hard to have as staff. It is better to have your board chair, or if you have a big enough board, you've got a development committee, to have that here, have that conversation of like, hey, you're not fulfilling your give get, what's up? And if that doesn't work and they are in a dud state, you can, a couple of different, then getting them off the board to free up that chair. You can either transition them to a different kind of volunteer capacity. We have an advisory council that is much larger than our board. And it is not that our advisory council are duds at all, but we have a lot of folks that can't serve on our board because they are staff at a nonprofit, or they're a staff in the Biden administration. We just lost our board chair to the Biden administration. So we use our advisory council as sort of a catch-all for the folks we want connected to us but can't for some reason serve on the board, whether that's they're a dud or they can't have a nonprofit fiduciary responsibility, whatever the case may be. But there's still someone we want to stay connected to because they can open doors for us, or they have a programmatic perspective we really want at the table. So that's one thing you can do is, do you have enough of those that forming some kind of advisory council would work? The other thing you could do, I've heard this called a lot of different things. In my world, it was plaque them, PLAQUE, plaque them. Be very kind, give them a lovely plaque, thanking them for their service, and open up the board chair. You'll always also hear that called bless and release. Thank you so much, and be happily on your way. Because your board chair, your board seats, because they are finite, those have to be filled with the people who can move the needles you need them to move. So if you aren't seeing any movement, it is absolutely appropriate to have a very, kind and humane exit strategy for them. The advisory council piece is an easier way to go. It causes less political kerfuffle. So those are the kind of two routes I've taken personally. Go ahead, Jess.
And can you talk about the tension between traditional fundraising that's relied on white wealthy people and fundraising that centers around equity and community voice with board members? So I guess that traditional fundraising and then the DEI type of fundraising with your board.
Yes, absolutely. I have talking points on that in onboarding. Okay. So if you give me like 2 slides and then bring that back up if I don't answer your question to fullness, because it is 100% one of the hottest topics in board fundraising right now. Any other questions on sort of this give-get contracting piece? I mentioned in terms of the peer expectation, your board chair has to be 100% behind you. So that if that is not implicit in the relationship, that your development director or whoever is that point is for the board chair, make sure you've got them on board, because their voice is going to be far more powerful than yours when it comes to those needed peer pressure situations of the give get or the bless and release or whatever you need to do, to make sure that that board chair is filling their duties. So that is worth a one-on-one conversation with the board chair before the start of every cycle. If you have a governance subcommittee at all, they are great people to present the job descriptions for the board with their endorsement, so that they, you know, the more you can build based on whatever your board structure is, that kind of peer review voice that, like, yep, we're behind the staff. This is making sure you have your board show back up to the staff, because staff going it alone with the board rarely works well. So those board allies, both in the chair seat as well as the governance seats, are really important here in the recruiting. Any other questions there?
Someone asked if it's an actual contract with the signature, or is it just more of an agreement?
Nope, it is an actual document you can, with a signature, that you can pull back to every time you, like, I used to review give-get contracts with my board members 3 or 4 times a year, depending on kind of where fundraising activities fell, so that you can actually say, hey, you'd host this house party. Or, hey, walk's coming up. You said you'd captain a team and raise $30,000. How can I help you do that? So it's more of that. It gives you the ability to remind them of very specific things they've committed to, but also say, like, how can I make this easier for you? And have that ongoing conversation. So yeah, we can grab some industry examples and shoot them out when we pass out the deck in the recording. All right, discussion time. What's worked and not worked in recruiting your board? So strictly recruiting is what I'm talking about. So identifying board members, doing the give-get contracts. We'll talk about onboarding once we wrap up this discussion, but I want to laser focus on how's recruiting going right now for you guys for a fundraising skill set. Janelle, can I call on you, since you've had some good luck getting your board members involved?
Yeah, thanks. So one of the things we did last year is actually during board meetings for decades, the fundraising and development reports were only done by our executive director. And last year, we restructured our board to have different committees that were fully functioning ish, and our development coach, we recruited 2 development co-chairs, and I turned to 2 more seasoned board members to also join us in more advisory capacity. And I noticed, at least with them, that as they became more involved in talking about our board fundraising at the board meetings with their peers, that they also became more vested in the fundraising. And that was really encouraging. I think they appreciate it more hearing from their peers than they hear us talking about the importance of fundraising.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that absolutely carries over to the recruitment process as well. That if you have a development subcommittee, your development chair is a perfect person to help you recruit, as is your board chair. It is, staff alone is really, really hard to make that happen. So that absolutely activate those folks that have shown to be a little bit more committed, because they will be your best points for peer pressure to turning the new board members into great fundraisers. Thanks, Janelle. Anybody else want to weigh in on recruitment or bring a challenge to the table? Is it Megan or Megan?
Megan, hi. We are in the process of recruiting 5 new board members right now. First real shakeup of our board in the last 8 years, and we've prioritized fundraising as one of our recruitment criteria. But in the past, well, it's an awesome idea. I'm hoping it will work. Our board, our board actually put it as the top priority for recruitment. However, they don't raise any money for us currently, but it is a major gap right now. We have this really ambitious strategy and not really the finances to fully support it. So anyway, but what I have found, I'm literally in the middle of recruiting. So what seems to be challenging is the folks who have really strong networks or connections to foundations and funding sources are not usually the same folks who have a lot of capacity or time to serve and really like dig in on our board. So I think I was just listening to your last piece. I think it's that right balance between having enough people that can do the job and raise the money, and then have enough people who can serve in the other functions. So it's really a balancing act. And I'm struggling a little bit with creating sort of like equitable expectations so that, you know, it doesn't look like we're letting them, you know, sort of skate through and not attend as many meetings or whatever, you know, because they're bringing in the money. Whereas, you know, John Doe's coming to every meeting, giving us so much of his time. It's a challenge to balance those two roles. So that's just my personal struggle over here right now.
Yeah, no, and it is really, really a common one. And I know with our board that has been the case. So the people that can knock open foundation doors for us aren't the ones who've got the time to do the knocking. So one of the things that I've done in the past that's helped is to have that honest discussion and say, you know, we would love to have you on our board. We know you have time constraints. Is there someone in your office, in your professional circle, in your family, depending on the type of board and the situation, that can be sort of your deputy that we could do the hands-on work with, leveraging the connections that you have that could be valuable for the organization. Yeah, I think it's best to go straight at it. I used to have like the chair of Heinz company on my board, and we had that conversation of like, there's no way he was coming to every meeting and everything else. So ended up working with somebody in that office as the sort of deputy and stand-in. I've had that same situation with a husband-wife on a board of like, the wife, there was no way that the wife could, you know, she was partner in a giant firm, traveled a lot, you know, but they had a huge network of personal connections. So asked them to sort of serve as occupy one chair as a couple. So lots of different ways to try to go at that when you've got those linchpin people. So you may want to think about that.
Thanks, that's really helpful.
Sure. Any other recruiting questions before we get on to onboarding? Jazz, anything in the chat?
I have a question. This is Elizabeth.
Go ahead, Liz.
With Power California. So just to piggyback on that, if you have a high profile board member who might be just way too busy, but you'll ask them to invite like a stand-in or a deputy to be able to serve, would it be the deputy or the higher profile person that you would have listed in your collateral materials as like the board member?
It's usually the higher level person.
Okay.
I've had one case where I actually had associate board members I had that flexibility in the structure of the bylaws, where we had a handful of those deputy type people. You know, so that is usually you want the name recognition on the board level.
Okay, that makes sense. I just want
to
make sure. Perfect.
Yeah. And in the conversation, when they're sort of tapping a deputy of, you know, that this isn't about guts or glory or, you know, saying that you served on a board, that it really is a personal service to the board member. And I've had deputies become board members too, when somebody rolled off and, you know, then, you know, the deputy rolled on kind of thing. So it's, you know, it also is a great way to expand the network.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, let's dig into onboarding. So just like onboarding new employees, onboarding new board members is a critical, like, make or break time for their fundraising piece. And I have been through a lot of board trainings, and there are days and hours spent on the programming. And here's what we do as an organization, and fundraising will get like this little blip. You can't have that. You have to, fundraising has to have equal weight to the programming in your training. And that may be a fight you have to have internally. We are always happy to provide you materials if you're in a particularly like needing to make a case up a chain sort of thing. Don't hesitate to reach out. We're always happy to give you articles or personal point of view or things like that to help you make that argument stronger. So if you are in that situation, please reach out. I usually do board training in 5 parts when it's a full training. So you always have to take this from the perspective of, these folks may have never raised $1. They may have never given $1. They may have never been exposed to any kind of fundraising stuff. So you have to start at the beginning. I always start with an overview of the elements of philanthropy. So really going through like, here's what institutional givers do, like your Ford Foundations and your Packards and your Haas's, you know, major donors, mid-level, small dollar donors. If you have any other revenue streams that are part of your pie. So if you have a robust e-commerce site, if you sell trainings, if you know, and I've got one grantee that does eco tours in New Orleans. So like lots of things that that are going to be specific to your education, but make sure that they get the interplay between institutional funding and major donor funding, and then sort of the smaller dollar stuff from mid-level down, because they're getting somebody to appreciate the difference between, I'm going to go ask somebody to write a $10,000 check versus I'm going to go captain a walk team and rally lots of small dollar donors for you. That's really important for them to get how all of those pieces fit together. And then per the question earlier about donor motivation, people always impose their own motivations and they assume everybody's like them. We're human beings. That's our nature when it comes to, well, of course they're going to give. It's a great cause, et cetera, et cetera. Especially your board members, because they're likely very entrenched in the cause. And that makes them a little sort of perspective blind. And we as staff can be as guilty of that. So really give them a overview of, why do people give to you as an organization? So there's the general stuff of sort of the donor psychology of why people give in terms of, you know, tithing or guilt or, you know, social entrepreneurship, whatever. But really, why are they giving to you? And this is where understanding the diversity of your donors, of, you know, this is part of upper middle class white culture, and that philanthropy has a certain social piece to that culture versus wealthier brown and black donors versus smaller dollar donors who, you know, in the disease space, a lot of the patients are smaller dollar donors. They don't have capacity, but incredibly dedicated to the cause. So whatever your particular situation is, this is part of your board training, and you have to have some pretty blunt conversations about why people give to you. And I've been in organizations that are, you know, that why to give is all over the map. And we're seeing that especially with a lot of the racial justice organizations right now have some really interesting donor motivation dilemmas to deal with, because they have gotten a wave of white donors that have never been on file before and that aren't necessarily sticking to their message because they've stayed true to the character and soul of the organization that has typically been supported more by Black and brown donors. And so now I've dealt with a lot of grantees that are like, do we pivot any of our messaging to retain this huge donor pool that we got over the summer, or do we stay true to who we are and our core because they're the ones who are going to stick with us? So those are the kinds of nuances you have to get underneath the hood of with your board. For the person who asked the question about those who give for equity purposes and for more of a justice mindset versus the entrenched culture of, you know, sort of traditional philanthropy, does that address what your question is? I want to make sure we hit that.
Hey, sorry, it was me, Michelle. And yeah, it does. I mean, I think one of the things
Michelle.
that we, that we've, I think made a decision about with our board is we've moved more and more towards centering racial equity in our advocacy work for kids and families, is that the board's like absolutely a critical part of our overall fundraising plan for individual giving, but they're actually not the driver. Like, they're a piece of it. But we've decided, for the purposes of like really bringing in people from the community that are just not going to be able to contribute in that kind of access to fundraising, and that's an equally important part of our board governance. That's just, so it's I think we're trying to balance all that. So, and relying on other donors and other individuals who have access to networks to go through them versus our board, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's incumbent and sort of our kind of ethical responsibility as fundraisers right now to shift our cultural view of philanthropy. Philanthropy is not a rich old white practice, even though, because we think of philanthropy with a high price tag. I grew up, as I mentioned, in the healthcare nonprofit space, and I don't think there's anything more cathartic and healing and empowering than somebody who's watching a grandparent suffer with Alzheimer's to give a gift and know that could buy the test tube that cures the disease. That is an incredibly empowering thing. Or in the racial justice sector, we have seen so much of that activity from small dollar donors of late. And I think it's just really, this is the place to have the blunt conversation during onboarding with the board of, we appreciate the networks. We are also trying to democratize philanthropy. And there is a place at our organization for every donor and every supporter, regardless of dollar amount. So I think that that's something that we as a sector have to do and really retrain our boards to think that way, that like, yeah, you can write a $30,000 check, but that person who can captain a $30,000 walk team, they're equally important to me. And that fundraising can be part of the program delivery, depending on what you do. Like if you're in healthcare and, donation and mobilizing funds can actually be part of the mission. So does that help?
Thanks.
Okay, great. Any other questions on donor motivation? I know that is a sticky one, having dealt with a lot of traditional boards. The other thing I will say sort of candidly on donor motivation, when I have worked with boards that were very disconnected from the communities that they served because the community had shifted from the inception of the organization, that causes tension. So I mentioned I worked for an HIV/AIDS organization, and my board members were largely gay men, 50-plus-year-old. And they had been with the organization since its founding, 15 years prior. And in a major metro market, the HIV/AIDS population is, much more diverse than that. Communities of color, low-income communities, all over the map, right? And a lot of the hard conversations with the board is, what did that mean in terms of having accessible fundraising events, so that it wasn't just, our traditional theater gala, things like that. So letting your fundraising and how you approach the community for funds really reflect who needs you. So I think that is a candid conversation you have to have with the board, and they can be the most tricky. And that's where those like the peer pressure of like a board chair or a development committee chair being really in lockstep with you philosophically is important. All right. The other sort of third prong of training I like to go through when I do this is today's trends. And this is, a lot of my training when I do this is a little more stock, but the trends always have to be spot on, because it's the argument against which you're asking for budget and everything else. So the pandemic, the uprising for racial justice, the elections, like it has been a hard year for us fundraisers. And some organizations have had windfalls because of it. Some of them, I've got grantees whose budgets have been cut, 40%. So that is all over the spectrum. You have to get your board grounded in the things that affect your fundraising that may not be as obvious to them. Presenting your annual development plan is part of board fundraising, because you actually then sort of show those elements of philanthropy and the donor audiences you're going after, and today's trends affect how they reflect in your operational plan for the year. One of the important things when you are training them on the development plan is where their role is in it. They should literally be able to see themselves in the plan. This may be a board giving, this may be, like, I've had grantees who actually have get budget lines as subdivisions of their other line items in their budget. So make sure that they can actually see where their efforts matter to your bottom line. Sort of oversimplify it, highlight it in yellow, whatever works. The other thing about board training is that it is a really good time to have that honest conversation about what scares them about doing this work from a fundraising perspective. Very few of them will have any concerns about being an advocate for you or representing you at programs or any of those things. But the fundraising is always, you will have at least one board member who is scared to death to do this. And what you should come out of this training with is that having sort of a robust conversation with them along the way of materials that they need from you to make this job easier for them. Whether that, there are some baseline ones we'll talk about in a minute, but some of them may be very custom, like they need stories or they need particular printed materials or whatever it is they need. This is your place to really start mining what tools do you need to do this. The basics that I think are required for you to enable them with: an elevator pitch. So they need to be able to explain what you do and why a donor dollar matters in 45 seconds. And of course, I would bet most of us have that written up. Talking points to address the common questions they're going to get if they start asking for money on your behalf or asking for attendance to events. It could be like, does all the money stay in our city or our county? Does the organization service this population versus that population? Have they ever had any drama at the leadership level? Like, has anybody ever, had any financial issues or that kind of stuff? Always give them your boilerplate case studies of your successes. How do you prove that you're serving your mission well? We all have, whether it's client stories or even more metric reports, things like that. Give them that thing that lets them have a tangible example of the mission on the ground. And if there are any templates they need for the specific activities they've committed to in their get. So if they need call scripts, if they've committed to doing donor stewardship calls, if they need, posters because they have agreed to recruit or sell tickets for an event, whatever it is, make sure that you actually match up one-to-one the things they need in their get contract. Does that all make sense? And any questions there about sort of the training and tools? Nothing in the chat?
Nope.
Yeah, all right. Okay. So follow-up is a critical part of the onboarding. So this is after you have done the group onboarding training at the beginning of every cycle. You need to meet individually with each board member and go over their give get. So whoever had asked about is this a written thing and do you make them custom per? This is where you actually sit down with a board member and go over them, because they will have had the context then of the board training for fundraising. So we talked about the financial investment with the give plus get, totally a culture of comfort, what you're going to ask for. When you're talking about their get commitments, some of the things to remember are like, get any limitations that they have in terms of time or availability. Like, you've got school teachers that serve, fall is probably a really bad time for them. If you have got accountants, they are not going to be available to you in March and April. So any of those things that take their personal life and schedule in crazy times, make sure you bake that into the contract of like, yes, I'm happy to host a house party, but not in these months. And remind them that like you have to be flexible when you're talking about the get commitments, because they may have ideas that you haven't thought of based on what they can do for you. Like I had a board member who was an art collector, and he actually held an art sale as his get commitment. And that's not something I ever would have thought of to put in the stock, like captain a walk team, host a house party kind of thing. I had another board member who was a basketball coach, and he said, I'm going to host a 3-on-3 charity tournament for the organization. Not something I ever would have thought of. So make sure that you like let people connect their passion areas and what's easy for them into the get part of their commitments. Don't be so boxed up that you cut off something that could be really lucrative. And also open up different areas of the community for you. And then go back and revisit any of those tool pieces based on the specifics of what you two agree upon in their get contract. What do they need? So like my 3-on-3 basketball tournament example, he needed help with city permitting because he wanted to use public park. Just those little kinds of things. So make sure that you get super specific and customized about this. This is a lot of work up front, but it then makes the rest of the term so much easier. So, all right, let's talk about onboarding. Would love to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly that you've had when it comes to board training or onboarding. Anything in the chat, Jasmine? I thought
Yes.
I thought I saw flashes over there. It just flashes orange on my screen. I'm like, okay.
They asked, what should we do if our board members are good at coming up with innovative ideas, but they expect the staff to coordinate and implement those ideas?
Oh, that's a great question. This is a time, and because you get those innovative ideas on the fly, during the give-get conversation is a really good time to set those expectations, but you're not always going to have the advantage of, being in that sort of negotiation space and being able to very clearly say, if you want to host a 3-on-3 basketball tournament, that's great. My staff can give you maybe, help with the permitting, and we can certainly be there at the event, but that's it. So we can have that conversation in that context. And then when they come up with ideas randomly at a board meeting or catch you in the hallway and like, hey, I want to do this thing. My favorite example of this, I used to work for the Alzheimer's Association Greater PA chapter, and I had a board member who wanted to do a dove release at a walk. Lovely idea. Permitting, expensive, questionable, environmental and ethics, and all of those things, right? And it's like, lovely idea, we can't do it. You have to be willing to say no if it's going to drain your staff or there's some other issue. Or if you don't say no, we can give you this. Like, I can give you this much staff time or help with this task. I think it's just like the sort of ethos you take to defining the get activities of here, let's put the box around it. So a lot of times with the events, especially that board members want to host, usually like I would commit, we will be there. I can have a staff member there early to help you set up and stay late to help you break down. But we can't do any of the prep with you. Sometimes it's also worth it to have that sheet in the board packet in terms of what they can expect from staff, because I've certainly had board members who expected staff to be kind of like their labor. And unpaid and unappreciated. Obviously want to protect your staff from that situation. So it's also a great thing to include in that board training of, set some standards for, if you have a great idea, great, we will come back to you with a commitment of staff time and schedule. So I think you just have to deal with it straight on and honestly and within capacity. Does that help and answer your question, or is that unrealistic?
Thank you.
Sure thing, Danielle. What other onboarding horror stories, successes, questions do we have? Anybody?
I'll ask one, Bethany.
All right. Go
Um,
ahead, Jess.
how long does the recruitment and then onboarding process take on average? I know it can
That
vary
is a
depending on the org.
really, oh my gosh, that's such a good question. It takes longer than you want it to. For me, the recruitment takes the longest because onboarding is like, usually it's a half-day training or it's a full day training, or you do it over a few sessions. So the onboarding piece isn't really like prepping for it. It's a pain in the tuchus. But you know, you get it knocked out and you have more control over the schedule. But the recruitment is a pain. So I would say it typically takes me 2 to 3 months to recruit a board member, between like identifying them, doing the background check to make sure that there's nothing, like if I Google them, does anything awful come up? You know, because it's our job to protect the reputation of the organization. Of course, I'm sure like all of your organizations have like criminal background check processes and things like that. But just from my background's in marketing, so I always check the Googles first of like, what am I going to find if I dig on you? So that's always my first step. And so, yeah, I would say it's a good solid 2 to 3 months. And especially if they are a like high powered corporate person and their schedule's like, yeah, I can talk to you in 6 weeks. So if you can pad that timeline and give yourself a full quarter to do your board recruitment, it helps. Like I'm having panic attacks because, as I say, we lost our board chair to the Biden administration, so it was unexpected and immediate. And I now need a new board chair like tomorrow. So it is a scary thing to be in that position. So, but yeah, it is longer than you want it to be.
Okay, and we have another question.
It's a great question.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
What if you're new to to your organization and you're just meeting the board members?
That's a great question. So most board members will have been around the block with the organization for a long time. It's rare that you recruit a board member that has not had some kind of affiliation with you as a volunteer or a donor or a program staff or, you know, a client, whatever it might be. So you're like the new factor to them. So really my approach is always like, prove why you should be at this table. And it's a careful needle to thread based on your own comfort level and personality. So there's obviously the professional side of your development background of like, why can you raise this much money for the organization? So your fundraiser street cred, but then also the vulnerability of why this cause is important to you. So for me, and the volunteer positions that I have on boards and things like that, I'm always honest about why I'm there. And I really appreciate knowing that when the staff talks to me, that it's not just a job. None of us who work in this sector it's just a job. There's a reason why we work day in, day out for the missions we serve. And it helps if you like are a little vulnerable with your board members and tell them what you're comfortable telling them of like, here's my personal stake and skin in the game. So that's how I deal with that introduction. And also that sort of, if you are fortunate enough to be part of their onboarding or training or anything like that, be super helpful. When they see you as this is somebody is bright, is helpful, dedicated to the mission, that's really all you're trying to get at when you're meeting them. I think it's important, especially as a young professional. I'm going to be 45 in a few months. I don't think I qualify there anymore, but I had to do a lot of board stuff when I was in my 20s and 30s. And I was always scared to death because these were folks that were far older and more accomplished in everything else. I had that imposter syndrome, and that was really difficult. So it was, I think, looking at it from the other side, I had just as much right to be at that table because I had the skill set to help move the mission. So really ground yourself, and you deserve to be there. So don't sort of kowtow because of their position as a board member. So I learned that one the hard way. Any other questions on onboard? And did that answer the question about how do you get to know them and introduce yourself?
Yeah, they said thank you.
Awesome. Any other onboarding things to share? All right.
Can I ask a question really quick?
Go ahead, Isabella. Yeah.
Thank you. So I've been with the organization for almost 3 years now. And within those 3 years, we've only had 2 new board members, and the executive director handled the onboarding process for them. But for the other board members, they weren't really onboarded because they were needed to transition from a fiscally sponsored organization to a 503.
Yep.
So I don't really know what was the onboarding process for them. And if we were to get new board members and have this detailed and strategic onboarding process so that they can become the fundraising people that we need them to be, how do I like transfer that onboarding to old board members?
That is an awesome question. So every year, your board should have a refresher. There are things that the board has to review every year when they start a new session of the board, like all the bylaws and document kind of stuff. It's a great opportunity to also do sort of the refresher onboarding. So I always just called it our board refresher, and like updated, program updates in the last year, and then, took a deep dive about the new trends in fundraising, and here's what our development plan looks like. And so you sort of, the way I've done that in the past is kind of onboarding day one for new people, and then do a day 2 or a second session that includes the current board members. That sort of is and you can cheat it for what you want them to know. So that is the least offensive way, I think, to do that. And it gives you an annual opportunity to always retrain the board members. And I mean, fundraising is a really fluid field of study and of practice. So there's always new stuff to talk about. Like the boards that I was dealing with 4 years ago, the term Facebook fundraiser never passed my lips. Now it's, something that's standard when I do board training, so that they understand how you fundraise on social media. And, so you have a legit reason to want to refresh them every year. And you can also cheat that legit reason into, the things that you want to remediate for them.
Thank you.
Great question. Any other onboarding questions, guys? All right. Okay, last section. During term fundraising, activation, and stewardship. So you've recruited great potential fundraisers, you've onboarded them, you have equipped them to do the job. Now what? Like all busy people, this will get backburnered for them. So you have to keep things in front of them. One of the best ways, obviously, are your board meetings. Those are your built-in touch points. But they can't be your only touch points. We'll talk about that in a minute. But at the board meeting, really reporting out on your progress to the goals that you went over in their refresher or in their onboarding. So here's the development plan I presented. Here's where we stand next to it. And again, bring up the part where, report out on that board specific piece that you highlighted in yellow when you presented the original plan, to say, here's the progress you guys are making. Awesome job. Or here's the progress you're making. What can I do to help? So you have to, the other thing, most of us on the phone are really geeky, data-driven fundraisers. We love our spreadsheets and our metrics and our models. Most of our board members are not going to be our people when it comes to that stuff, and not nearly the level of geekdom that we have. So you have to make the metrics really easy for them to understand. Are you on track with enough money? Do you have enough donors to make your goal? If not, where are you going to get them? How much is it going to cost you? Are you retaining donors? Enough donors? Are they giving what you need? So talk about your donors as people that are represented in your fundraising revenue plan, and say we need more new donors. Don't talk about we have to invest X in donor acquisition. It's no, we need 100 more donors, and here's how we're going to get them. So talk to give your fundraising report in conversational lay language, unless you're dealing with a board of professional fundraisers or something, and they would get the metrics that we are typically talking about. In terms of outside of the board meetings, it's important to have an ongoing conversation with your board members that are fundraising for you, which should be everybody. So this is one of those things you need to, coordinate with your ED, with your development director. This can be spread out among your team if you are lucky enough to have one. I typically do quarterly calls or back in the days when we could actually breathe on each other safely, I'd take my board members to lunch quarterly and we'd go over their individual plans and go like, how are you doing on your get stuff, especially? If you do this and they have a give part of their give get where they're writing a check, when you do that meeting in sort of calendar Q4, that's a great time to bring up their give commitment for calendar year end and tax deductions. Right after tax time when they're doing tax planning for the following year, also the other really opportune time to bring up the give commitment. But really the quarterly calls are a lot about the get stuff because that's what takes more time for them. So review those individual plans. Is there anything else they need, et cetera? The other thing is to keep the information flowing. You know, just because they're on the board doesn't mean the brand is in front of them every day, that they're thinking about it every day. So sending them those informal updates on wins you've had, successes you've had, if you've gotten any coverage in the local news. I love it when our grantees do that for me. Obviously it's different than a board member, but you know, when they get a legislative win and they're like, hey, look what we did. I'm so excited for them. And it's a great way that they keep their brand top of mind for me. So take that approach with your board members. They don't, just because they're a board member doesn't mean all the communication has to be in memo format and formal and stuffy. Send them the good stuff and send it as often as it comes up. Just so, as I say, that brand touch is in front of them and they see that ongoing work in progress that they are a really important part of. Any questions there about those suggestions? All right, so let's talk about what you guys are doing continually with your boards, if I can actually get my slides to advance. So what do you guys do at board meetings and then off board meeting times to really steward around the fundraising commitments that they've made? What's working, what's not?
I can chime in here, Bethany.
Yeah, go ahead, Danielle.
Yeah, so something I think that's working for us right now with continually engaging the board around fundraising is, like you were saying, those informal touch points around wins. So just making sure that, you know, either when we are getting a new grant or we get like a special donation from an individual, as well as like the results of different campaigns that we run, to make sure that we're intentionally including the board in closing the loop on that or letting them know, as well as other like programmatic successes. I think that really like encourages board members, at least in our experience. So yeah, I think that's something that's working.
That's great. Yeah, I share a lot of like with our board, our experiment results. So all of what we work with our grantees on is all of like fundraising experiments. So when one of our grantees like gets a big win, and like we crack some new fundraising technique or they get a really great return, I love to share that because it also like educates them about what we spend our days doing. So I think that makes the conversations easier when we get to board meeting time. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the informal off-cycle communication. I know one of the things we're struggling with from a board perspective is how to structure our board meetings in a way that is quick enough for them, but engaging. Because none of them are fundraising experts and our particular work is kind of technical, and that we fund fundraising, bringing that up to a level, and I haven't nailed it yet, I will fully admit that. It's sort of an ongoing process to try to like how to talk about these experiments, and what people are doing so that they get jazzed about it. So that is certainly still a work in progress for us as well. Go ahead, Jess.
Got a question in chat. Curious to know if folks have a board folder, I guess like a shared folder that board members can access, where you can file, we can file call scripts, materials, upload news coverage, etc.
Yeah. That is a great, I would love to hear if anybody else has that. We keep a folder accessible to our board members, and the subfolders are like all the governance docs. So there's like the boring folder, and then there's the, you know, like all of the decks that we've presented at meetings and any tools that we've developed for them. So we do that on Box, and I know that they have appreciated that, especially the ones that travel a lot, because it's been accessible to them. What do other people do to share that kind of stuff?
I do the same. I have a Dropbox folder that has all the information that they would need, but I also send them bi-monthly newsletters with like any updates on our campaigns, any upcoming events that they can participate in, and any like publications or news coverage of whatever it is that we're doing at the moment.
That's a really cool idea to do like a board specific newsletter. I like that a lot. I might steal that. What are other people doing to keep their board kind of in the know and things accessible? Anything specific around board meetings that's been a challenge that you guys would like to discuss, like attendance at board meetings or engagement or anything like that?
This is Megan from the Alliance again. I think one challenge we have is determining the agenda and how much do we drive versus how much do we allow them to submit like discussion topics that they want to cover that are probably relevant, like more to their organization or a project they're working on. So curious to hear how other people do it. We usually do a call for agenda items and then try to like prioritize them based on the amount of time we have left. But I would love to hear what other people do to create their board meeting agendas.
Yeah, that's a great question. What does the group think in terms of agenda creation? How do you handle that? So much silence. I can tell you what we do for agendas. It's one of those things that I think is working okay. As our board grows, probably we'll need to do something broader. But we actually do kind of a mid-cycle call with our board chair to talk about what does he want to bring? Our now to be former board chair. And then fuse that into our standing agenda items. So we always do a program report, a marketing report, a fundraising report out. And there's always like an executive director report. And then send that back for his approval. So it's another one of those good stewardship touch points to say like, hey, what do you want to cover at our board meeting? And usually we don't get a lot of crazy topics. The things that our board members typically bring up to add are like ideas they have about new revenue streams we could try to develop, because all of them are more in the corporate world versus the nonprofit world. So they're like in the financy space. So there's a lot of that kind of feedback for us. But that's how we roll. What about other organizations on the phone? How do you develop your agendas?
We have a comment in the chat. So they said our agenda has always been driven by the ED, with the board chair approving it a few weeks before the meeting. And the board member requests for agenda items are taken at the previous meeting and discussed by the full board at that time. So they discussed beforehand. Yep.
That sounds super formal. Yeah, no, that's definitely, if your board meets more than quarterly, I think discussing at the previous board member meeting and what are you going to do next is definitely super viable. If you, depending on how often your board meets, I think dictates what can you put in the previous meeting, because ours are just spaced a little too far apart for what we do, because we're talking a lot against the economic background too in terms of funding need. So So that is needless to say, a 90-day-old data set would not do us any good. So I think that has to be really customized to your group. It's a great idea to use that time. We always remind them at the end of the meetings when the next board meeting is, so everybody has it on the calendar. Anybody else on how you develop your agenda or are communicating with your boards during meeting? Do we have anything else in the chat, Miss Jasmine?
Nope.
All right. So I know we're coming close on time here. Thank you guys for making the time for the discussion. Are there any questions we didn't cover that are burning that anybody wants to discuss? We have about 10 minutes left in our time together. If not, everybody gets 10 minutes back in their day. All right. So we will have our next fundraising Friday on, Jasmine, did we just get a question? I saw the orange flash.
No, they just thank you for the presentation.
Oh, okay. I was like, question? So I'm dealing with 2 monitors here, so it's very funny. So our next fundraising Friday is of course in 2 weeks. We're going to do it a little bit differently. We have asked one of your fellow grantees, their executive director, fundraising director, and a board member to come be grilled as part of a panel discussion so that we can get, direct answers from people who are in these positions, and we can ask sort of anonymous questions. So once I have them fully committed, I'll actually put the call out to you guys for questions so that I can bake them into my panel stuff. So if there are questions you want to ask a board member or an executive director and you want to do it anonymously about board stuff, send them my way. I've put on here our future dates for Fundraising Fridays. That was one of the requests, is that folks wanted to get them on the calendars. So they are typically every other week. The only break in that schedule that's off a little is April, because my birthday is in April and it happens to fall on a Friday and I'm taking it off. So that's the only little schedule hiccup there, but those are the dates. They are set. We do not I have no content planned beyond February 19th. So you guys are getting a lot of surveys and asks about what's on your mind. So please don't hesitate to put that in the survey or shoot me an email. Sky's the limit if you want to talk about events, small dollar fundraising, major donor fundraising, institutional giving, you name it, we will do a session on it. I may not be the speaker. I may have to recruit somebody because my skill set only goes so deep. But we can definitely, between our team, cover just about any fundraising curveball you can throw at us. The other shameless plug, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, if it would help to have somebody do board fundraising training with your crew. So Isabella, if that would be a good thing to do with your board, that is something we can do in the one-on-one coaching sessions. Typically, I do a discovery interview with you about where the board needs are. I develop a deck, I send it to you, and you say, yes, this is cool or not cool. And then I actually present to your board. I can also just do the deck for you. We're really flexible in how we use those 5-hour consulting chunks, but just sometimes it is easier to have somebody else do the dirty work with the board. So if that would be useful to you, and you are eligible for one-on-one coaching through Resilience Initiative or FLA, please don't hesitate to ask if you need help. All right, guys, as always, we love to hear from you. And I know a couple of you who had reached out after our last session for help on scanning through your social media narrative. I owe you feedback, so that is on my to-do list. But please don't hesitate to reach out with questions. Please answer the surveys when you get sent them, because I live for the responses of what you like, what you don't, so we can tailor the next session. But have a great weekend, and thank you guys so much for spending your Friday with us. Take care, all.
Thank you.